Welcome to our afternoon workshop number 1, called Dreaming the Salinas Case Study, the Hind River Ranch. And we have 3 amazing people up here on our panel this afternoon. I'm going to introduce them one at a time, and they have bios that are so incredible that I'm going to read them. I don't often read, but I want to read them because I don't want to miss anything important about them. The first person, and in fact, they're not quite in the order of which they're sitting, so I will touch you. This is Dr. Douglas Pirto. And we learned earlier that since it's a Finnish name, I should say Pirto. How was that? Pretty good. Close. It was close. So that's how we would say it in Finland, Dr. Douglas Pirto. He's a professor, and he's also the department head of Natural Resources Management and Environmental Sciences at Cal Poly. He earned his MS in Forest and Wood Science from UC Berkeley. And may I call you Doug? Oh, thank you. Okay, so Doug has taught at Cal Poly since 1985, and he teaches courses in silviculture, forest harvesting, environmental impact analysis, forest management, and other forestry and conservation courses, all at Cal Poly. Could we have a round of applause for Doug? Down at the far end, he's waving now, David Yoon was born in South Korea and moved to the USA during his teenage years. He received both his BS and MS degrees from the Department of Natural Resources Management and Environmental Sciences at Cal Poly. David started to teach GIS in 1998 and is currently teaching introductory and advanced GIS classes at Cal Poly, and he's also the GIS supervisor for the city of San Luis Obispo. Round of applause, please, for David Yoon. And so you can guess the third person sitting in the middle, I bet, right? There he is waving at us. Tom Maston is currently a lecturer in the Bioresource and Agricultural Engineering Department at Cal Poly. He teaches engineering, surveying, advanced surveying, and remote sensing classes, as well as being one of the coordinators for the GIS and Agriculture minor. Tom has been involved with various projects, including one in Ecuador, Cal Poly's Swanton Ranch, and now the Hind River Ranch. Could we have a round of applause also for Tom? Thank you. I will jump off the stage. This is a 1-hour presentation. They're each going to do a presentation in the order in which I introduced them. And at the end, we'll have time for Q&A, and I will be the microphone runner. So if you want to ask questions of our panel, put your hand up in the air. I'll find you, and I'll bring the mic to you. All right? So without further ado, thank you.
Good afternoon, folks. I'm happy to be here. I know that Tom and Dave are very happy to be here to speak to you about a project that just came to us out of the blue, so to speak, and it was quite fascinating how the 3 of us got involved with that, creating a GIS database for the Hind River Ranch. Mr. Hind came in on a Friday afternoon and said, you know, I have a property which is in the headwaters of the Salinas River. And he said, I need some help. I've had a number of people doing research studies, but I'm having a hard time relating all of that information. To be quite honest about it, I can't even find it in the drawers I've got. And he also said that he felt that technology was moving forward and he needed someone to help him gather data, collect data, archive data, store data, and be able to make some relationships between that data. And he said, would you be interested? And in my spare time, I said, perhaps I might be able to squeak out some time. That's how it started. Mr. Hind then said, let's go for a ride, and we went up to his property. And once I saw the property, well, it was a done deal. And we put together a project. I put the project together, but if it hadn't have been for Tom Maston and David Yoon, we wouldn't have a project. So I wanted to say at the outset here that David Yoon and Tom Maston are going to be presenting to you some very fascinating information. And to them, I say thank you very much for this wonderful project we've had together. This is an applied project. This isn't necessarily a science-based project in terms of cause and effect. This is a project where a landowner is seeking information and trying to figure out how to use that information to manage his property. And so you will also note that landowner, Mr. Hind, is listed as an author. So we'll move on. And we thank Mr. Hind, and Jamie Fawcett is here today. Jamie, where are you at? Jamie's here, and so we want to, would you give them a round of applause for the support we received for this project? And Jamie, thank you. We thank Bioneers and Michael Jenks. Michael's trying to get me to drive a hybrid, what do they call it? A hybrid, what do they call it? SUV, and I'm a Jeep guy, you know, with four-wheel drive, and so he says I need to do that. So Michael teaches for us in our department there at Cal Poly, and so we wouldn't be here if Michael wasn't interested in what we were doing for the Hind Foundation. And so Michael, we thank you very much, and we thank the Bioneers. Certainly we thank our students, because we very much involved them, and you'll hear Tom and Dave talking about the interaction that we've had with our students on this project. We've had a number of people in our grants development program help us with the details of getting a grant in place, and we thank them, and also the people that we work with to take care of all of our administrative work, Leslie and Lisa and Jamie and Stacy Hunt. So thank you very much, and there's Michael now. Thank you, Mike, for inviting us and being here. Now, I'm going to preface this talk by, I don't care if you're right-handed or left-handed, right in terms of your perspective or left in terms of your perspective or somewhere in the middle as a centrist. I don't really care if you're a conservationist or a preservationist, biocentric or anthropocentric. We all need food, water, shelter to survive, and we all bleed red. And at any one time, 50% of us are represented, and the other 50% aren't necessarily as fully represented, at least we think we're not. But we have to find ways to resolve conflict. We have to find ways to improve communication, and we have to find ways to establish a process where we describe a desired future condition that we all can get on board and support. That's what we're going to be talking to you about here in the next few minutes. How to gain the right perspective with the right information to help us make better decisions. 2, ensure sustainability to enhance our ecosystems, our land, our natural resources, our agricultural and urban areas. How can we use technology transfer, and how can we use that in relationship to a decision-making process, an ecosystem management process, to help bridge this communication gap, to help us resolve conflict? And whether you're right or left, conservative or liberal, we do have some issues with reference to the Salinas River, and how possibly can we use some of what we've learned on the Hind River project with reference to the larger context of the Salinas River itself. So our objectives today will be to describe the purpose and need for this study, which I think I've more or less done, to provide a brief ecosystem management overview, which I will be about ready to do here in a second. Mr. Hind would be here, but he has a variety of personal matters to attend to, and so he's asked us to present 3 slides on his behalf, and we'll describe his landowner perspective of the Hind River Ranch. David and Tom will speak about geographic information systems and a geographic approach, and together we'll discuss the results and usefulness in the broader context of the Salinas River. We had a variety of objectives to this study, as you see here. We wanted to establish a common GIS map and data storage system and retrieval system for the Hind River Ranch. People collect a lot of information, but it's in a different mapping base and a different format, and it's hard to relate one study to the other and make sense of it all. We wanted to establish a project coordinate system so that we could relate not only our work, but other folks' work to the work that we have done. And that then led to establishing a linkage to all past, present, and future Hind River Ranch studies. Obviously, the data needs to be interpreted, analyzed, and evaluated, and we've started that process, but it obviously is going to be beyond this project, that work will continue. Obviously, people need to be trained on how to use GIS and the results. We hope to recommend future studies, not hope, we are recommending future studies, and at the end of our talk, we'll talk a little bit about the implications of our work. Now, what is ecosystem management? Well, it's the skillful, integrated use of ecological knowledge at various scales to produce desired resource values, products, services, and conditions in ways that also sustain the diversity and productivity of ecosystems. It's a wonderful definition. And I've worked with this process for several years now, and I really believe in it. A lady by the name of Manley with the USDA Forest Service was one of the first to try to capture all of what had been written about ecosystem management into an actual step-by-step approach. And it's that step-by-step approach that's guided the work that I have done, and to agree it's guiding the work that we're doing here today, or over the last year for Mr. Hind and the Hind Foundation. Moving forward, ecosystem management is a new understanding of interactions and interrelationships. It transcends spatial and temporal boundaries. A lot of people see only the present, and it's important to see what was there in the past as you relate to what the condition is now, and as we decide what the desired future condition should be for the future. In all contexts, it involves components. We're talking about a forest, the trees, how those trees are arranged in terms of structure, and the processes that affect those trees: fire, wind events, snow. It focuses on outcomes rather than outputs. It doesn't focus so much on the how, but rather let's first get agreement on the desired future condition. And it's not a thing to do or be involved with, but rather it's a frame of mind, an approach to work, to bring people from different backgrounds to help make better decisions. There are a variety of terms. I could list several hundred, but I'll just list a few here to get you thinking about ecosystem management: hierarchies, and ecosystem elements, air, water, the living components, structure, and process, as I've already talked about. If you can't measure it, you sure can't manage for it. So you have to have what are known as indicators. And you have to have some frame of reference on those indicators. Let's take fire, for example. How frequently did fire burn in an area 200 years ago, as contrasted to how frequently is it burning through those systems now? What's affecting that frequency now? And what might we try to strive for in the future, or if we could use fire, given current circumstances? So that's a range or a reference, range of variability or reference variability that is listed there. The other aspect of this is that all things are never perfectly known, and our knowledge is iterative as we move forward. So that's what's meant by the context of adaptive management. And within all this, you want to then try to identify that desired future condition and that management variability, that recommended management variability where we want to be. Plainly stated, what was there? What is there? What do you want there? And how do you get there? And where's there? A pretty simple way to think about this: ecosystem management. Communicating between people. Having the information and the facts starts the discussion to answer these questions. Can you see the connection that we could use this to resolve some of the issues associated with the Salinas River? Can you see the connection of technologies like GIS that can help bring us those facts that can inform ecosystem management processes like I've just described to you, and further how we might implement recommended actions? Let's discuss this further. Mr. Hind, when he came to us, said, I have a need, as I described at the beginning. I want to know more about my property, and I'm not doing the best that I could in terms of keeping track of the information, and I need your help to help me figure that out. So gather more information and help me relate that information one to another. Identify land management priorities then based on that information in regard to the land itself, the natural resources, and ultimately the sustainability of that property. And to quote Mr. Hind, as you see there on the bottom, we wanted to experience firsthand the benefits of good resource management in relationship to the plant and wildlife protection, and in relationship to land conservation, and in relationship to ecosystem conservation. His vision and the vision of the Hind Foundation is to conserve and protect the ecosystems out there, to provide a real-world experience for students. And when Mr. Hind came to me, he said, Doug, as incumbent, if we get involved in a project, you need to assure me that you're going to have students helping you with this. And then third, he said it's a case study. As we work here, perhaps what we learn here could provide context for others. And you see in this photograph Sun Cup, the flower, you see mountain lions and our cubs, you see lace lichen, you see one of our students, Colleen Mooney, you see a red dragonfly in the far right there, and waterfowl, as you see, in relationship to the Salinas River. Now, what value does this have for the Hind Foundation or Mr. Hind himself? It organizes information for strategic decision-making. It helps, the data helps with ongoing management and future management actions. And then obviously it'll provide direction for the Hind Foundation in relationship to identifying future studies. I had David put this slide in there, and if we could, I would have had you go up on Google with us and look at what Google can do for you. But how can you see the landscape, given all the details? You got a wonderful map of the Hind Ranch there, but what are the details? And how do you relate those details one to the other? That's what we're about to tell you, the rest of the story. And the rest of the story is now going to be told to you by David Yoon, and then he'll introduce Tom Maston at an appropriate point. David?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Yoon, and I'm the GIS supervisor for the city. And in a way, the GIS is what I do all the time. And I think this is what Doug wanted to show you. So in the past, we are used to a map like this. And really, if you know how to look at a map like this, you can visualize, and yet visualize the watershed and topo and slope and all that. But really, that communicates a lot better. And not only that, we can separate out lots of different layers so that you concentrate on one information. All right, so what is geographic information system? And yet, well, what is geographic approach? The term is somewhat new, but the concept is very old. It's something that we used it all of our history. The moment you're born, you have to have this concept. Otherwise, you will not survive. It's basically, we have a problem, or we have some desired outcome. You have to ask, what do you want? Then, you go get the information. And is that information good? Because if you make decision off of bad information, that will be bad, right? And finally, once you get the information, then you analyze it, thus making an informed decision, and you act on it. That cycle is something that we all know. I think we all know that's how we do. When you go buy a house, do you just buy a house? No, you find that out, where am I gonna buy? How much is it? You get data. But do you get the data from your friend? Maybe. No, you should go get it from somebody who does the professional business, right? So you get the good data. And then you finally pick your final choice, and then you buy in sort of deal. In a way, the geographic information is so important that we have to talk about what it really is. A lot of people think that GIS is just a map. GIS is not just a map. Map is a component. Map is one of the derivatives of the GIS. Some people think that GIS is a software. It is, but it's just one component of GIS. GIS really is a collection of hardware, software, data, and personnel designed to efficiently capture, store, update, manipulate, analyze, and display all forms of geographically referenced information. That's what GIS is. It's not just the software. It's not just some hardware you buy. It's not just some map that you print out. It is all of them. Is it really being used? Yes, this is the city of San Luis Obispo's GIS graphics. At the city, GIS is central to manage all that. Yeah, we even have a natural resource manager using GIS. Our police and fire, they use GIS. In fact, everybody does. It's the key information that we base our decisions. Why? Because it informs, it assists, and enables us to do whatever we need to do. For example, why is that location information so important? Let's say we have some event happening, 10 or whatever you like to manage. Let's say it's a 10 fire, or 10 invasive species coming in, or 10 crime happen. Just imagine 10 of something. Now you have to make a decision. Let's say 10 of something happened at San Luis or Hind River Ranch. Can you make a good decision? Does people make decisions based off just knowing how many you got? We do, unfortunately. But what if that 10 event was like this? Somewhat random, all over. So you make a decision based off, yeah, it's all over the place. Now I have to make some decision. But what if it didn't come out like that? What if it came out like that? Would you now make the same kind of decision? It's still 10. Would you make the same kind of decision from this to that? You probably would not. What if that 10 event actually came out like this? If it did, even elementary kids school will probably say, yeah, the next one might be right there. There's still 10, right? Now notice that how more informed decision you could make just because of location information. If that 10 event, whether invasive species or not, came out like that, you will immediately have a decision, management decision for that area and that area. Wouldn't you naturally do that? And now, just because of geography, you are making a lot more informed decision. Not just 10 of something in that situation. All right, so how do we do on this project? So fortunately, we had all of our stuff. We had staff, we had software, we had data, because Cal Poly teach this stuff. So we used the computers and GIS software that's already in the lab. We had some GPS devices, variety of them. Some are survey grade, some are mapping grade. And we have cameras and handhelds and some classical survey equipment. So all those things we had it. So that was very good. So what did we actually do? It's very simple. First, it's kind of like the geographic approach. First, we're going to try to get all the data. So rather than just collecting from the bottom up, hey, what else is already there? So we compiled all possible GIS data from federal, state, local government, and even from the consultants, and then we compiled it and assessed it. Then they will tell us, hey, we are still lacking somewhere. And that's why we start setting up the field control so that we can go out and measure it accurately, and then start collecting our own field data. Once it comes in, we, once again, make sure that what we got is good. So we do quality control. And then finally, we start making derivatives, deliverables, whether analyzing or making map or sharing information, all that. So who did it? Here they are. So I had 6 students, actually 7. So we have Trevor, Colleen, Christine, Dean, Sam, Kaylee, and Tom had Ryan and Eva, and one of the recent graduate worked for me at the summertime, Kevin. So these are all readily available students. All right, so what did they do? Well, first thing, hey, if you're gonna manage your property, you should know your neighbors. So we mapped the properties using assessor parcel map and actually redrew. And the property boundary has been somewhat updated with some new information because we had a surveyor, professional surveyor, actually redone some of the eastern side. All right, roads, you need to know where the roads are. Yeah, there was existing road, but we mapped it much more carefully, more accurately using GPS. We need a trail, streams. We even got spring well and drainages and all that. And this by far was most time-consuming one because my students walked the entire thing, probably several times. Aspect, yep. Why do we need to know aspect? Because if you drive up 101 and you look to the side, you will see vegetation change. Depends on north aspect or south aspect, because it does affect. And this one was derived from the elevation data from the county using special analysts, and we now can tell which area is facing north, south, or east. And not only that, we can actually reclassify this to any direction. So hey, I just want to know northwest direction. Then we can very quickly, with few clicks, can reclassify the data. Slope, is slope important? Yeah, slope is very important to manage. And at the same time, rather than doing 5, hey, I just want to know above and below 30%. Can we do that? We can do that right on the fly. Once again, this was another analysis that we done and made a layer. This is a very interesting one. The fire actually happened on July 16. And the following week, I had to go to ESRI's conference. And I knew there was a fire, but I didn't really get to see it. But I went to the San Diego, and I was having a lunch, and one of the BLM staff was sitting next to me, and somehow we figured out, hey, we live here very close to each other. And then he said, well, yeah, there was a fire. Yeah, I knew that. And he said, I have a fire boundary. And so I asked for it, and here they are. Within a week, we were able to get the CAL FIRE information. Very interesting. Contour line, should you know the contour line? Now we made it with a 20-foot contour interval, but we could make it into 10 foot. If we have a LiDAR data, we can actually make it into whatever contour interval. At the city, we have a 0.5 meter contour. So there's a lot of possibility. With 0.5 meter contour, you could probably pick out all kinds of trails that's hidden. Now this one, I'm gonna use it as an example. We have 3 different kind of vegetation came out. First, this was downloaded from the USDA garbage data. And their intention is to mapping the whole United States. So this is huge geographic extent. And nobody will do it by hand because it doesn't make sense to do it by hand. So this one was done using remote sensing. Now originally it was a Landsat, but they don't just use Landsat, they use spot imagery, any satellite imagery basically. So while this was good, it's actually very jagged in some area because the remote sensing data. And some of the data is not quite on. Although they do some spot check, but they don't do spot check for the whole area. But this was what we studied out. So we said, well, yeah, it's somewhat right, but some locations we don't like it. So then we got to the county, and county had their vegetation layer. And this was done in 2007, and their primary objective was to, hey, where are my forests? Where are my range? Very broad category. it's vegetation, but their work is a lot more fine-tuned because rather than using 5 meter or 4 meter resolution or 30 meter resolution, they were using 1 foot resolution imagery. So they were able to make very good define. However, what they lacked was the detail. So here we are, my students who walked the field using the Calvage and Slow County as a reference. Also, we even had a 3D glasses, so they have a 3D view of the area. And aspect was put in because aspect has a huge influence on vegetation, and came up with our own vegetation layer, which is far more detailed and far more spatially accurate. And we did that. Why? Because now we can say, rather than, hey, we have a coastline walk in our land, rather than saying that, we can now say, hey, we have 81.5 acres of coastline walk. Now, aren't you making a lot more informed decision? You are. And not only how much we know the shape of it as well, and how they are distributed. All this because we want to make better decision, better analysis. So we did that for soil, all other layers basically. We got lots of layers, including project-related data. This is still in progress because it took some time to compile the previous projects, but it's going to continue on. And one of the projects is actually field control, which now Mr. Tom Maston will talk about.
Thank you. Again, my name's Tom Maston. I'm a licensed land surveyor, and I teach at Cal Poly. I've been teaching there full-time for about 10 years now, and I teach surveying and photogrammetry and remote sensing. And got a chance to work with these two again, and so I jumped at it. Maybe a little old to jump, but I tried to jump at it anyway. My task was real simple. I just had to assist 2 students in establishing a grid over the Hind River Ranch. The grid is a 500 by 500 foot grid that we set permanent markers so that we could relocate that grid whenever we needed to do it. We set the markers in the general study area that we were working so that as people do studies, they can go to these points. The grid really is, and it's important to understand what this is, it's just a local coordinate system for the project. It's so that any study done can relate to this coordinate system that's consistent, it's a fairly high precision, and it's very stable. That's what we're trying to do. And we memorialize it by setting these monuments. We set about 40 monuments along the grid lines themselves and another 30 or so that we use as what we call primary control. The question I always get is, well, why do you do that? Why don't you just take a GPS out there and GPS everything? You say, you're just old. Yes, I am old. But that doesn't really answer the question. The question is, why doesn't GPS work? And it doesn't work because primarily it's not very precise and it really isn't very stable. And I've done different talks about this before. No one ever believes me. So I go out and I do a little experiment. And I did that for this talk so you get a sense of what I'm talking about when I say the GPS won't give us the precision we need and especially won't give us the stability we need. Come on, am I missing something? There we go. And so what I do is I took 2 GPS units. These are different types of GPS unit, a basic GPS unit, and then one that's called differential corrected. So it's a higher precision GPS unit. And all I did is set them on a point over 2 different days, and I collected data for a short period of time. And this is what it looks like, and I want you to sort of try and understand how this works. This is the first day with the differential corrected GPS unit. So I set it down on a point, and I have it collect 100 positions of that one point. And this is a plot of the average position, and the blues are all the points. So compared to the average position, this looks like they all fell within about a foot of that average position. And this is my standard deviations, because I just need to do that, because that's the way I'm trained. But it shows you that overall for this data set, it's pretty good. 9/100ths of a foot, 1/10 of a foot, so a little over an inch, and in the y direction, about 2/10 of an inch. The second day, same unit, you see a little different spread, and you see that now I've got about a 2-foot spread, exact same unit, exact same point, exact same conditions, except that it's on a different day. And now I get a standard deviation of about 28/100ths and 1/2 a foot. These are the higher precision ones. So then I look at the low precision, the standard GPS, what you'd have in your cell phone. And if you look at that, you get the same sort of relationship. Day one, if you look at this is a basic GPS. I really have pretty good precision, and all the points fall within a foot of each other. So that looks pretty impressive. Second time, well, that's not so good. In fact, some of the points actually fell off of this plot. But still, if you look at your standard deviations, it's saying that, you know, you have a pretty good chance of being within a foot of where that average position is. And almost everyone would say, well, most projects being within a foot is good enough, plenty good. And yeah, for most projects it is. I would agree with you. The issue is this is how it relates to the average position. If I look at that point and I determine where that would be on the actual GPS system, that's the center of this big red cross here. And then those crosses are where those average positions actually hit. And 5001, 5002 are these two first differentially corrected positions, and they're falling within a couple feet of where that calculated point is. The 503, or 5003, 5004 are the uncorrected, and you see they start to fall out about 5 feet away from that point. And if you did this enough, you would see that the uncorrected would fall. You'd have some that are more than 10 feet away. The corrected ones should stay within about 3 or 4 feet. And again, okay, 3 or 4 feet for a lot of studies, that's probably good enough. The 10 feet, you know, if that's good enough, then that's fine. Not all that many studies like 10 to 20 feet error. So that's the precision component. The other is the stability component, and that comes to looking at where this position is now and looking at to where it's been. This point I used is a control point. It's a control point on the national control system. When they do an adjustment of the whole United States and Canada, this is one of the points they use. And it's called Control Point Monterey. And it's in Monterey Heights in San Luis Obispo. Nice control point. You can see a lot of things from there. And again, the center of that red is where I calculate the GPS position to be. The national control system, the last adjustment was done in 2011, and that is where that published position is. And you can see that's about 3 or 4 feet from where the GPS position is. In fact, if I use this as for the Hind River Ranch, and in order to calculate where our Hind River Ranch was based on the national control system, I had to calculate where the position was when we did the survey, which was the beginning of this year in January 2012, and you can see that doesn't even match the published location. And if you look at this system over the last 25 years for the current national system, if you look at every major adjustment, what you see is that it's moving. 2007, they had a major adjustment. Then in 1992, they had their first GPS adjustment. They used all GPS to control it, and you can see that that's quite a bit different. And then the original position for the current system in 1986, you see that's about 8 or 9 feet from where I say the GPS position would be today. In 1986, this red dot was also right here. So what I've got are two systems running, one running, moving in one direction at one magnitude, the other moving at a little different direction at a lot different magnitude. And that'll continue. If I come back in 10 years, all those will move. The Earth isn't a big solid ball. It's continually changing size and shape. And so if I'm trying to get position on it, I've got to keep modifying that position. So you can't just go and GPS it if you have projects that have a temporal component to it. Long term, those positions will just change. So that's why it's important to have this grid system out there. That's what it's for. Every project can go to one of these control points. We don't care how well we relate to the world, we care how well we relate to our project. And so for our project, this is a fairly stable system. We just picked one of our control points. We set that as our point of origin, and then we ran what we'd call true north, true south, true east, west grids to intersect. We set primary control, which was control tied to the national system, and we do that solely because if there is some big catastrophic event, we can actually calculate where these points would be again. We don't think we'll have to do that, but we have it tied to national control if we have to. From this primary control, then we set our grid points along the areas that are critical. They're all 5/8 inch rebar, 24 inches long. We drive them flush to the ground, we cap them, we mark them with wooden stakes and lath, which will only last a couple years, but the rebar itself should last for years and years. So that at any time, you should be able to find one of these, and even with a basic GPS, you at least will get within 10 feet of where it is, hopefully, so that you can reestablish that, and then any study can always get on this local control system. It's all based on that local control system. If someone further down the road had a different system, as long as it's tied to the national system, we can relate them. But if we just use something like GPS all the time, we'll have problems in the long run. Okay. That's it. There we go. This was an interesting project for me. I, first of all, had two students that had both surveying experience, and Ryan had advanced surveying classes, advanced GIS classes, but neither of them had actually worked in an environment like the Hind River Ranch. So it was very interesting to send them out. I went with them all the time. They couldn't quite believe when I told them what we were going to do, that we were really going to do it. They finally got on that, yeah, I was usually serious when we said we're going to hike up through that brush and to get to a point. It took them a while to do it, but they were always eager, always willing, never late. This, for us, was about 5 months, every Saturday for 5 months. They went up there with me, and we did this work. They also did all the office work. Ryan established the GIS database of all our data that David used, and Eva established our mapping for our management of our part of the project. And so they were every Saturday, all Saturday, and then once a week during the week, they would come and do this while they were going to school. So they put a lot of effort into it. So it was really fun being out there with them. I'm not sure if now they want to be a surveyor or don't want to be a surveyor, but for the most part, we had a pretty good time. The terrain was interesting. I've worked in areas right around here, so I know what the terrain's like, but never worked in areas right around here with people that didn't know how to work in areas around here. So safety became a big issue. I don't mind them going through the brush, but I don't want them to fall off a cliff. And so we had to be concerned about that, and we did modify our plan. Normally, we would set these monuments at the intersections of all the grids. It just wasn't safe to do that everywhere. So we had to modify that so that we set them along grid lines, places where it's, if not easily accessible, at least it's accessible. Not only for my students, but other students that are working on these projects. So that became an important issue. And then last, just working with Greg Hind and all of his people was really fun. They were extremely helpful, bent over backwards to do anything they could to help us out there. And then just being out at the River Ranch itself, sort of made going out every Saturday for weeks on end an enjoyable thing to go to Hind Ranch. So from my standpoint, it was a very worthwhile experience. I thought we established a good control net that should last for a long time. Now I think I'll hand it back to Doug.
So I'm going to just take a moment here to summarize, and then we'll take your questions. As you can see, we have designed and created a geodatabase for the Mr. Greg Hind and the Hind Foundation. That geodatabase has a very good control and grid system, not only for our study and studies that will continue as we're funded to do so, but for other studies as well. Certainly, we've provided a learn by doing opportunity for a variety of students, and we will continue to do so. And we believe we've met the project objectives, but that'll be up for Jamie and Mr. Hind to fully judge when we give them their final report here within the next month or so. What can we conclude from this? We conclude the following. GIS revealed spatial relationships between features. I think you saw that the data on veg survey, I knew it was too general to begin with when we first looked at it. And I even mentioned that to Dave. And so we continue to come up with finer tuned criteria, and we produced a vegetation map that I think is going to be very useful for future wildlife studies and other types of relationship studies. It enables users to see the entire landscape. The old adage, seeing the forest for the trees, understanding the landscape for the context that it is, and the watershed boundaries and the subwatershed and the details that comprise that landscape. It helps us relate past, present, and future studies and ultimately monitoring so that we can use adaptive management as we move forward. It enables us to identify future work, where we might want to do erosion control work, where we might want to do some wildlife studies in relationship to the vegetation that we've identified. We know more about the Hind Ranch today than we did a year ago. And that is because we used the process of ecosystem management, and we used GIS as the tool to make a foundation of information available to the Hind Foundation and Mr. Hind. And obviously, it took a licensed surveyor, though, to help us stay oriented out there. So what are the implications? Facts-informed debates. Without the facts, we're going to continue to sling mud at each other. GIS and good data provide those facts. They help us acquire this larger view and hopefully come to some consensus on desired future condition. It enables us to evaluate cumulative impacts, and I think that's where a lot of the conflict is with reference to the Salinas River. It helps us gain concurrence on desired future conditions that we want for that wonderful river system, and hopefully we'll be able to resolve conflicts and dream about the Salinas. It won't be a dream, it'll be a reality. A river system that's enhanced, yet provides for our needs here in California. Dreaming the Salinas. And it's with that we'll turn it over to you now and allow you to ask us questions. Thank you very much.
Doug, David, and Tom, aren't they something? So thank you for being here today, and I see a question right in the front. I'll start there and then pop your hand up, and I'll make my way around to you with the microphone.
Thank you so much. This has been really informative, and I'm curious, hypothetically, if this were going to be a study area that could be like that term in perpetuity for following the impacts of this kind of environment, the dynamic of it, and watching the impacts of climate change, are the parameters of the vegetation boundaries fine enough to understand how the climate change would affect that the habitat and the landscape over like what kind of period? Am I making sense? My question?
No, you're asking a very good question. I can tell you this. First, we were trying to catalog existing information, and then we decided that we wanted to zero. I knew that the existing veg data was just too general. Chaparral, rangeland, and trees. And oh, by the way, there's riparian out there, and if you walk that riparian zone on the Salinas River, it's quite varied. Some of it is brushland, some of it's grassland. And there's a real difference between meadows and rangeland, grassland areas. And so that wasn't resolved. So I think that the preliminary work, which is not so preliminary, it's pretty good, is a start. And we have it identified to north versus south aspects. And we have a pretty good sense of the major vegetation that occurs in all those. And we have these now control points that would allow another study to come in and get a greater degree of resolution over what we've done. So I think we've made a good step in that direction. So yes, it could be a long-term study that could look at that very thing. That's a good question. A for the day for that.
I'm interested in migratory habitat, migratory pollinators and local pollinators. So I was wondering if you make this type of mapping available to other communities, say if the Audubon Society wanted to look at a habitat, they could see where chamise is and they know what birds are going to be eating from different plants and oak habitat and that. Will the mapping be available to other groups?
I'm going to let David answer that. I have a comment, but I'll let David go first.
Yes, I believe all the data, with the exception of archaeological data, will be available not only as a downloadable, but on a browser-based application in near future. That's our vision.
And if I could add to that, but the data right now is owned by Mr. Hind and the Hind Foundation, and so we definitely have to ask them first. But hopefully that data will be made available for public use. It obviously was used by us to educate our students, so I would assume that would be that permission will be provided.
Yeah, I think the last time we met, Mr. Hind we did talk about making a browser-based application for this. So I think it's pretty good.
Good question.
I have a question. It's a process question. The material that you presented to us today is extremely exciting. If the process that was used on this smaller section of land, the Hind River Ranch, were to be projected to a study such as the Salinas watershed in the county, how would you translate your experience with the private sector Hind Ranch experience and to a larger territorial area?
That's a very good question, and it's one that led me to want to be involved in this study to begin with. And we wanted to be helpful to not just Mr. Hind, but many of us, like I said, whether you're conservative or liberal, have had concerns about the Salinas River and just knowing more about what is happening to that river system. I think we have a good case study here. I think you wouldn't have a 500 by 500 foot grid system initially, but you could come up with a control system for the entire Salinas River that Monterey County on the north and San Luis Obispo County on the south, we could begin to map out the quarry sites. We could begin to map out where all the water development sites are at and gain some perspective of total water use in relationship to agriculture and urban. We could map out what those parts of the Salinas River that have fisheries and those that don't. We could begin to think about what the Salinas River was like 200 years ago before we did all of this, to gain some perspective of that situation. Not that we'll ever return to that, but that creates a frame of reference, and we could develop maps for that. And then we have the existing information, then decide what it is that we want for a desired future condition. And having all of that information available then better informs all of us in terms of when we've come to a threshold where we need to be concerned or do something differently. Or perhaps we can do more agriculture. I don't know if we fully know that. But those are all kinds of things that I think a larger study would take. But there's a lot of blood spilled over this, and there's a lot of issues, aren't there, with reference to all of this. Our intent is to say, look, we all bleed red, liberals and conservatives, we've got to figure out what that desired future condition is because this is our environment that we're trying to live in, and what is it that we want of the Salinas River in relationship to the future. And what's Monterey County doing? What's San Luis Obispo County doing? What's the cumulative impact of all of that? And I think a good GIS system could be set up to begin to monitor that all people could have access to. I would suggest that it might require a central person. And I know I have my critics because some people will say, well, that information is already readily available, but where? And who has it? And who has access to it? I would suggest that maybe Cal Poly could be a place where we have a dedicated faculty member that would be involved with Salinas studies and to help create a database that all could have access to and to help us better think about the Salinas River. I'm kind of promoting my own department here, but I think it's going to take something like that to make it happen. Some dedicated resources. So if you know somebody that'd like to help us on that, we could sure use the help.
We have time for one more question, if anyone has one, or we can let them wrap up. You want to conclude and say bye?
Well, I really appreciate your question because that's where I've come to, is that it's going to take some dedicated resources to take us to the next place in relationship to the Salinas River and other kinds. Because Michael Jenks, if I could say this, Michael, well, we know various folks that want to donate money to correct problems in various places, but how do you know those problems are the most pressing? How are you prioritizing where you want to expend money in relationship to the issues associated with the Salinas River? What is our desired future condition? What is it that we want? How do we measure it in relationship to how do we know we've gotten there? I think that's an outstanding question, and thank you for asking that.
Could I add one thing to that?
Go ahead, Dave.
Like if you were gonna say, so how do we take this experience into the whole watershed, Salinas watershed? I think the one of thing is that I can easily visualize collecting a parcel for the entire Salinas watershed. You say, wow, really? I mean, that can be done? But the thing is that it's already mapped. All you have to do is contact some of this county, and then, they can be, many of them are free, but some of them can be just purchased. So now, not only just saying, hey, here's a watershed, but you can now say, we have this many properties within the watershed. How many percent is owned by the federal government? How many by private? How many by non-profit organization? You can also say, well, how many property actually touch the river? So now you can say, well, the properties that actually touches the rivers are this many. So you can actually do a lot of different analysis simply by gathering the data. And vegetation-wise, I probably would not see doing what we did for the Hind River Ranch for the whole watershed. But at that scale, I believe the CalVeg data will be pretty good. And do we have elevation data for the whole watershed? We do. You won't be as detailed as what we have, but we have 10-meter resolution data for the whole United States. So we can do aspect, slope, contour, all that stuff for the whole watershed. It's just someone needs to say it and make it go, and it'll be done.
Thank you so much. Could we have another round of applause for our panel?